With just 50 days to go before Election Day, voting rights groups in the key battleground state of Florida are scrambling to get people registered just weeks after a federal judge rejected strict limits on voter registration drives, which would have severely limited the number of people signing up. It's also one of the latest hurdles in a heated battle over voting rights gripping much of the country. More than a dozen states have passed new voting rights laws, which Republicans say will help prevent voter fraud, but Democrats argue these laws will disenfranchise thousands of voters, many of them minorities. Joining us now, CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. He is the author of the new book out tomorrow, The Oath, the Obama White House, and the Supreme Court. So, Jeffrey, when you look at this, it's sort of a mishmash, if you will, across the country as these cases hit the courts. A lot of judges are making changes to these laws. Some of them are throwing these laws out. Nonetheless, there's a real concern that just because judges change or dismiss things, it doesn't mean people are getting that message, and a fear even that people won't go to the polls because of confusion about some of these cases. Do you think the effect of some of these laws is still going to remain, even though the judges say they're not in effect?
Well, this has really been one of the great lesser-told stories of the 2012 campaign, which is the legal trench warfare over all these laws that were passed when the Republicans did so well in the 2010 elections. You know, just to state the obvious, if you look at that map that you just put up of the states that changed their laws, virtually every swing state is up there. So these aren't just sort of random states. You've got Florida, you've got Ohio, you've got Pennsylvania, you've got Wisconsin, you've got Michigan. All these states have had controversy. Now, what has been surprising, certainly to me, is how successful the Obama administration, the Justice Department, the Obama campaign, more liberal public interest groups have been successful in challenging these laws, and many of them have been scaled back or repealed. But the question you raise is, did they succeed in intimidating people out of voting? I don't know how to measure that. There's probably some degree of intimidation, but you can be sure that the Democratic Party, which is most upset about these laws, is fighting hard to get people registered, especially in Florida, over the next couple of weeks.
And the other thing, I think you and I have talked many times about this already, is a question of voter fraud. Is there any evidence in your mind yet that voter fraud is a real big problem across the country? Basically, the thing that Republicans say caused these laws in the first place?
You know, so far, based on the evidence I've seen, voter fraud is the cure for which there is no disease. I mean, these laws purport to stop voter fraud, but when you look at the number of cases of actual voter impersonation, people going to the polls trying to fake their way into voting, non-citizens voting, the number is tiny, is infinitesimal. Now, it is true that the United States Supreme Court, in a decision by the liberal John Paul Stevens, has said voter IDs, picture IDs, may be required by states. So the states are sometimes acting within their rights, but is there actual voter fraud? There doesn't seem to be much evidence that this is a serious problem at all.
And the other thing is about the Voting Rights Act itself. Without boring the people who are watching this with too many details, there's something called Section 5 in there that applies to certain states. And there's a lot of talk here in Washington, D.C., I'm sure you've heard it, that the Supreme Court actually might throw out Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which could have a big impact. Could you talk a bit about that?
Right. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, 1965, basically said there are certain states, almost all in the South, that have such a history of discriminating against minorities that they have to go through what's called pre-clearance. Any changes they make in their electoral system, the Justice Department has to approve. The states don't have the autonomy to do it on their own. These states have challenged Section 5 and have said, look, what may have been justified in 1965 is no longer justified. That history is over. We deserve to be treated like every other state. The Supreme Court is almost certainly going to take that up this year. And what we've seen in Florida, which is largely covered by the Voting Rights Act, is that the Justice Department has still said they're discriminating against minorities. And that's, again, one of the big issues. both in this campaign, but will certainly be before the Supreme Court next year about whether the Voting Rights Act still can be applied against these states.
And there is really a problem in applying it, isn't there? It's not easy to do because you end up with some counties with some rules and other counties with different rules.
That's right, and you're also getting to the issue of intent. Intent is always hard to prove in legal settings, whether it's in criminal cases or civil cases, or it's like, why is Florida changing its law? Is it changing its law because they're making a good faith attempt to stop voter fraud, or are they simply trying to disenfranchise people who tend to vote Democratic? That issue is critical in voting rights cases, and it's not easy to resolve.
That's for sure. Thanks so much for that, Jeffrey Toobin.
Okay.
As you know, I'm working on a documentary on that. It should be coming right around the middle of October, so stay tuned for that.